I've been aching down there, the black mail-order bride confessed to the weathered cowboy nursing whiskey in the corner booth, her voice barely above a whisper as dust motes danced in the saloon's dying light. The frontier town watches her with cold eyes and curled lips, this dark-skinned woman who dared step off the evening stagecoach into their sun-bleached world. They assume her fate, quiet suffering until she disappears back into the wilderness from whence she came. But the lonely cowboy sees something different as he sets down his glass, his calloused hands steady despite years of failure eating away at his struggling ranch. Her words carry weight he recognizes, the same hollow ache that's been gnawing at his chest since he lost everything that mattered. Their separate hungers for belonging could either heal two broken souls or destroy them both in a territory where mercy is scarcer than water. Will understanding bloom between the dismissed and the forgotten, or will prejudice bury their last chance at redemption? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt outside Murphy's saloon, kicking up clouds of Arizona dust that hung in the still air like judgment itself. Etta Mayfield stepped down onto the wooden platform, her worn traveling dress clinging to her frame after 3 days of bone-jarring travel. The leather satchel in her hands contained everything she owned in this world. Conversations died. Whispers began. She had never seen so many white faces staring at once. Their eyes followed her every movement as she smoothed her skirts and looked around for the man who was supposed to meet her. Samuel Hutchins, the rancher who had written such kind letters promising a new life far from Philadelphia's suffocating poverty. A woman in a faded blue bonnet pulled her children closer. 2 men in dusty work clothes stopped loading supplies and watched with narrowed eyes. The stagecoach driver tossed her trunk to the ground without ceremony and climbed back onto his perch. Sheriff Bradley emerged from his office across the street, his badge catching the late afternoon sun. He approached with heavy steps, his expression grim. Etta's heart began to race. The sheriff removed his hat. Bad news always came with removed hats. "Miss Mayfield, I presume," she nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm afraid I have unfortunate news about Mr. Hutchins." The world tilted. Her carefully constructed dreams crumbled before he even spoke the words. Snakebite took him 3 weeks back, buried him up on the hill behind his place. The sheriff's voice carried no emotion. "His lawyer already cashed the money you sent for passage, nothing left of the estate." Etta's legs nearly buckled. 3 weeks. She had been traveling toward a dead man while spending her last savings on train tickets and stage fare. The cruel mathematics of survival began calculating in her mind. No money for return passage, no family to wire for help, no prospects in a town that looked at her like she carried plague. "The inn has a room," Sheriff Bradley offered without conviction. Mrs. Patterson, the innkeeper's wife, stepped forward from the gathering crowd. "We're full up for the week." The lie hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew the inn rarely filled even half its rooms. Etta stood straighter. She had faced worse humiliations than this. The school board in Philadelphia had at least pretended politeness, while they destroyed her career for teaching Negro children alongside white ones. "Perhaps there's work available," she said quietly. Someone behind her laughed. The sound cut deeper than intended. Inside Murphy's saloon, Jed Barnes sat in his usual corner booth, nursing his second whiskey of the evening. He watched the scene unfold through the dust-streaked window with growing discomfort. The woman's dignity in the face of such cruel treatment reminded him of his own mother, who had faced down creditors with similar quiet strength. Jed knew about being unwanted. His ranch teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. Most folks in town had written him off as another failed soldier who couldn't adapt to civilian life. The nightmares from his cavalry days still woke him most nights, but that was nobody's business but his own. The crowd outside began to disperse as the entertainment value wore thin. The woman remained standing beside her trunk, studying a crumpled letter in her hands. She seemed to be calculating something, her lips moving slightly as she worked through numbers or possibilities. Jed finished his whiskey and walked outside. "Miss," he called softly. She turned toward him, wariness flickering across her features. Up close, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the careful way she held herself despite exhaustion. "There's a chair inside if you need to sit a spell." Etta studied his weathered face. Crow's feet spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. His clothes were clean but well mended. Most importantly, his voice carried no mockery. She followed him into the dim saloon. The few patrons glanced up from their drinks but returned to their conversations. Jed gestured toward his booth and signaled the bartender for coffee. "Thank you," Etta said, settling gratefully into the worn wooden seat. They sat in comfortable silence while she sipped the bitter brew. Outside, her trunk waited like a monument to dashed hopes. "I've been aching down there," she finally said, pressing a hand to her chest. "Right in my heart, for longer than I care to admit." Jed nodded slowly. He recognized that particular pain. This place seemed like an answer, a chance to build something meaningful with someone who wanted the same things. Her voice caught slightly. "Foolish dreams, I suppose." "Dreams ain't foolish," Jed replied. "Just fragile sometimes." Etta looked at him more carefully. Something in his tone suggested he understood fragile dreams quite well. "You have a kind way about you, Mr. Barnes." "Jed Barnes." "Mr. Barnes, I'm Etta Mayfield." The coffee warmed her hands, if not her prospects. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for this moment, she sat across from the first person in Dusty Creek, who had treated her like a human being worth basic courtesy. Etta spent her first night at Jed's ranch in the small guest room that had belonged to his late mother. The walls were bare except for faded wallpaper roses that had seen better decades. She lay awake, listening to coyotes howl in the distance, and wondered what morning would bring. Dawn revealed the full scope of Jed's troubles. Papers scattered across his kitchen table like fallen leaves. Bills stamped with red ink warnings. Letters from the bank growing increasingly stern with each passing month. His ranch books looked like a child had attempted arithmetic with a broken pencil. "Can you make sense of any of this?" Jed asked, gesturing helplessly at the chaos. Etta picked up a supply invoice dated 3 months prior. The numbers had been calculated wrong. Someone had been overcharging for basic feed supplies by nearly 30%. She found similar errors in 5 more documents within minutes. "You've been cheated," she said simply. Her fingers moved swiftly through the paperwork, organizing receipts by date and vendor. Years of managing classroom supplies and school budgets had taught her to spot financial irregularities. The Philadelphia School Board had tried similar tricks before dismissing her. Within 2 hours, she had created 3 neat stacks: legitimate expenses, questionable charges, outright fraud. "This supplier has been padding every invoice since last winter," she explained, pointing to a series of feed bills. "And this lumber company charged you twice for the same delivery." Jed stared at the organized piles with something approaching wonder. Numbers had always been his enemy. Letters on a page might as well have been hieroglyphics. But Etta made the chaos speak sense. "How did you learn all this?" "Teaching doesn't pay much. I handled purchasing for 3 schools before they decided my kind weren't suitable educators." Her voice carried no bitterness, only fact. "When you count every penny, you notice when pennies go missing." That afternoon, Etta rode with Jed to confront the feed supplier in town. She had written out careful calculations on clean paper, documenting every overcharge with precise dates and amounts. Tom Wheeler, the supplier, shifted uncomfortably behind his counter as Etta presented the evidence. Her quiet authority filled the small store. "Seems there might have been some bookkeeping errors," Wheeler mumbled. "Seems there were," Etta agreed. "The question is how you plan to make this right." Wheeler issued a credit for $200, enough to keep Jed's cattle fed through the coming month. Word spread quickly through Dusty Creek. The woman who had arrived with nothing was already changing things. Some folks whispered about her being too smart for her own good. Others wondered what other secrets she might uncover with those sharp eyes. Clayton O'Brien heard the gossip over drinks at Murphy's saloon. The big rancher had been circling Jed's property for months like a vulture waiting for weakness. Barnes was supposed to fail quietly, then sell his water rights for pennies on the dollar. "That woman is going to be a problem," O'Brien told his foreman. At the ranch, Etta transformed more than just the books. She organized Jed's correspondence into a proper filing system. His scattered tools found homes in labeled drawers. The kitchen began producing meals that actually tasted like food instead of punishment. But her greatest victory came when she taught Jed to read the contracts he had been signing blindly for years. They sat at the kitchen table each evening after chores, working through words by lamplight. Jed's calloused fingers traced letters like he was learning a foreign language, which in many ways he was. "This contract says you'll pay storage fees even if you don't use their facility," Etta pointed out during one lesson. Jed squinted at the small print that had always intimidated him. Now he could see the trap, hidden in fancy legal language. "They've been charging me for 3 years. Not anymore, they won't." Within a month, the ranch began showing its first profit in recent memory. Etta had renegotiated supply contracts, eliminated fraudulent charges, and organized their operations with military precision. She wrote compelling letters to cattle buyers in Phoenix, describing the quality of Jed's beef with persuasive detail. Orders began arriving. Real money, not just promises. But success brought new dangers. O'Brien's friendly visits became more frequent and less friendly. He made casual inquiries about Etta's background and legal status. His questions carried implications that made Jed's jaw tighten with suppressed anger. "Fine-looking operation you're running now, Barnes," O'Brien said during one uninvited stop. "Shame if something were to happen to disrupt your arrangements." The threat hung in the desert air like heat shimmer. That evening, Etta found Jed cleaning his rifle on the front porch. The weapon hadn't seen use since his cavalry days. "Expecting trouble?" she asked. "Hoping to avoid it?" She sat beside him on the wooden steps, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The desert held its breath around them. "In Philadelphia, they tried to intimidate me into leaving quietly," Etta said. "Threatened my reputation, my livelihood, my safety." "What did you do?" "I documented everything they said and did, built a case so thorough that they couldn't claim ignorance." She paused, remembering the disappointment of ultimate defeat despite perfect preparation. "It wasn't enough then, but I learned valuable lessons about gathering evidence." Jed looked at her with growing understanding. This woman who had arrived with nothing possessed weapons more dangerous than any rifle. She fought with facts and fought to win. Think that approach might work against O'Brien? Only one way to find out. The drought arrived like a slow-burning fever. Each day brought less water from the well until the familiar sound of the pump handle changed from confident gushes to reluctant trickles. Cattle gathered around the diminishing water source with increasing desperation. Jed checked the water level at dawn and again at dusk. The measurements told a grim story. At current consumption rates, they had perhaps 2 weeks before complete depletion. "Other ranchers are selling to O'Brien for whatever he offers," Jed reported after a trip to town. "The Morrison place went for half its worth yesterday." Etta studied the land ownership maps she had borrowed from the courthouse. Strange patterns emerged when she traced the properties O'Brien had acquired over the past 2 years. Each ranch sat on prime water access routes. Each previous owner had faced similar sudden crises before selling. "Too convenient," she murmured, running her finger along the creek beds and underground springs that connected the properties. That night she heard unfamiliar sounds outside, footsteps near the well, metallic clanking that didn't belong to their evening routine. She crept to the window and saw shadows moving purposefully around their water source. By morning, their well had run completely dry. Jed stared into the empty shaft with the hollow expression of a man watching his future disappear. Without water, the cattle would die within days. The ranch would become worthless. Everything they had built together would crumble. "Mighty unfortunate timing," O'Brien observed when he arrived uninvited that afternoon. His polished boots and clean shirt stood out starkly against the dusty desperation surrounding them. "I might be willing to make an offer. Neighborly thing to do." His price was insulting, 1/4 of the ranch's actual value. "Need time to consider," Jed replied through gritted teeth. "Course you do. But don't wait too long. Generosity has limits." After O'Brien left, Etta walked the property boundaries with determined purpose. She examined fence posts, gate latches, and irrigation channels with the methodical thoroughness of a detective. Her teaching experience had taught her that problems usually left evidence for those patient enough to look. She found what she was looking for near the back pasture. Fresh tool marks on the underground pipe that fed their well. Someone had deliberately damaged the connection, redirecting their water flow toward O'Brien's property. But sabotage was only part of the pattern. That evening, Etta spread every land deed and ownership document she could find across the kitchen table. By lamplight, she studied signatures, dates, and legal descriptions with growing excitement. The forgeries were subtle but consistent. Someone had been altering boundary descriptions and water rights allocations with careful precision. The same hand had modified multiple documents over a 2-year period, always in O'Brien's favor, always at the expense of struggling smaller ranchers. "This isn't just about your ranch," she told Jed. "It's systematic theft." She showed him the evidence. Altered survey markers on the Peterson deed, modified acreage calculations on the Williams property, water rights transferred through paperwork that had been changed after the original signings. But who would believe us? Jed's voice carried the weariness of a man who had seen justice fail before. Your word and mine against the most powerful rancher in the territory? Etta understood his fear. In Philadelphia, she had presented perfect evidence of discriminatory hiring practices to the school board. They had listened politely, then dismissed her anyway. Truth didn't always triumph over power and prejudice, but this time felt different. This time she wasn't fighting alone. "We need more than accusations," she said. "We need irrefutable proof." The next morning brought devastating news. Sheriff Bradley arrived with legal papers. Someone had reported stolen property in Etta's possession, the documents she had been studying, the evidence of O'Brien's fraud. "Sorry, Miss Mayfield, but I have to search your things." They found the papers exactly where the anonymous tip claimed they would be, hidden in her personal trunk, planted evidence so obvious it insulted everyone's intelligence, but legally sufficient for arrest. "This is ridiculous," Jed protested as Bradley prepared the handcuffs. "She's been trying to expose the real thief." "Not my job to sort out motivations, just following the law." Etta submitted to arrest with quiet dignity. She had faced worse humiliations and survived. But as they led her away, she caught Jed's eye and nodded toward the kitchen table where her real evidence remained. The papers they had planted were copies. The originals, with all their documented proof, stayed behind. The jail cell was small and stifling. Through the barred window, she could see townspeople gathering to discuss the scandal. Some faces showed sympathy, but most reflected satisfaction at seeing the uppity outsider brought low. O'Brien visited her that evening, smugness radiating from his well-fed frame. "Nothing personal, understand? Just business." "I understand perfectly," Etta replied. "The question is whether you understand what you've really done." Her calm confidence unsettled him. This wasn't the defeated response he had expected. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Jed sat staring at the evidence Etta had compiled. Her careful documentation revealed a conspiracy far larger than simple land grabbing. The scope of O'Brien's fraud extended to dozens of properties and thousands of dollars in stolen assets. For the first time in his adult life, Jed could read and understand legal documents. Etta had given him that gift. Now he faced a choice that would define both their futures. He could stay silent and safe, or risk everything to defend the woman who had saved his ranch and taught him to see his own worth. The lamplight flickered across pages of evidence as Jed made his decision. The territorial courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Word of the trial had spread through 3 counties, drawing ranchers, townspeople, and curious observers from as far away as Phoenix. Some came seeking justice, others came for entertainment. Judge Harrison took his seat behind the weathered bench, his gray beard and stern expression commanding immediate silence. He had presided over cattle-rustling cases and claim disputes, but nothing quite like this combination of theft, fraud, and social scandal. Etta sat beside the court-appointed lawyer, her back straight and hands folded calmly in her lap. She had spent 3 days in jail preparing for this moment, organizing her thoughts with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. The prosecutor, a thin man with ambitious eyes, presented the case against her with theatrical flair. Stolen documents found in her possession, a pattern of suspicious behavior since arriving in Dusty Creek, the testimony of upstanding citizens who questioned her motives and character. O'Brien took the witness stand wearing his finest suit and most sincere expression. He painted himself as a concerned neighbor trying to help struggling ranchers through difficult times. Miss Mayfield seemed to have unusual interest in legal documents that weren't her concern, he testified smoothly, made folks uncomfortable with all her questions and note-taking. Several townspeople nodded agreement from the gallery. The woman had been too bold, too clever, too quick to challenge established ways of doing business. When Etta's turn came to defend herself, she rose with quiet confidence. Her court-appointed lawyer had advised against testifying on her own behalf, but she had insisted. This was her fight to win or lose. Your Honor, I stand accused of stealing documents that reveal systematic fraud against the ranchers of this territory. Her voice carried clearly through the packed courtroom. I did not steal these papers. I studied them. I analyzed them. I documented the pattern of forgery and theft they contain. She walked to the evidence table and picked up one of the disputed documents. Her fingers traced the altered sections with practiced precision. This deed shows clear signs of modification after the original signing. The ink color changes mid-sentence. The handwriting shifts slightly in the boundary descriptions. The paper quality differs between the original text and the additions. Judge Harrison leaned forward with interest. Few witnesses demonstrated such detailed knowledge of documentary evidence. In Philadelphia, I spent 5 years teaching students to recognize historical document authenticity as part of their civics education, Etta continued. I know forgery when I see it. She presented her analysis methodically, pointing out each altered document with the thoroughness of a professional educator. The gallery grew restless as her testimony extended far beyond simple denial into comprehensive evidence presentation. O'Brien shifted uncomfortably in his front row seat. This wasn't the rambling, emotional defense he had expected. Furthermore, Etta said, the pattern of property acquisitions following these document alterations reveals a coordinated scheme to steal water rights from struggling ranchers during times of crisis. The prosecutor objected that such speculation exceeded the scope of the current charges. Judge Harrison overruled him. The defendant may present her complete theory of the case. Etta spread a hand-drawn map across the evidence table. She had recreated the territorial water system from memory during her jail stay, marking each property O'Brien had acquired and the water sources they controlled. Every ranch Mr. O'Brien has purchased in the past 2 years sits on a critical water access point. Taken together, these properties would give him near monopoly control over irrigation for the entire valley. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as ranchers began recognizing the implications. Several men who had sold to O'Brien during recent crises sat up straighter in their seats. But Miss Mayfield, the prosecutor interrupted, if you possess such evidence of wrongdoing, why were the stolen documents found hidden in your personal effects? Because someone planted them there after I had already compiled the real evidence, Etta replied calmly. The papers found in my trunk are copies of courthouse records easily obtained by anyone. The original documents, with my analysis and documentation, remain in Mr. Barnes's possession. All eyes turned toward the back of the courtroom, where Jed sat, clutching a leather portfolio. His face showed the strain of a man wrestling with momentous decision. Judge Harrison addressed him directly. Mr. Barnes, do you have additional evidence to present to this court? The moment stretched like a held breath. Jed could remain silent and safe, or step forward into uncertain consequences. Everything Etta had taught him about courage and moral responsibility crystallized into this single choice. He stood slowly and walked to the front of the courtroom. His boots echoed against wooden floors in the absolute silence. Your Honor, I have documents here that Miss Mayfield organized before her arrest, he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. She spent weeks studying these papers, teaching me to read them and understand what they meant. He opened the portfolio and began reading aloud from Etta's careful analysis. The literacy she had taught him during evening lessons now became their most powerful weapon. This survey document shows the Peterson property boundary moved half a mile east sometime after the original filing, Jed read with deliberate precision. Miss Mayfield calculated that this change transferred water rights worth approximately $1,500. His testimony continued for 20 minutes, each revelation building upon the last. The gallery listened with growing amazement as the scope of O'Brien's conspiracy became clear. When Jed finished reading, Judge Harrison called for a brief recess. The courtroom erupted in heated discussions as the implications sank in. Etta caught Jed's eye across the room and smiled. Whatever happened next, he had chosen truth over safety. They would face the consequences together. Judge Harrison returned to his bench with the weight of decision etched across his weathered features. The packed courtroom fell silent as he shuffled through the evidence one final time, comparing the original documents with Etta's meticulous analysis. In 30 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered such comprehensive documentation of criminal activity, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Miss Mayfield's analysis reveals not simple theft, but systematic fraud designed to steal the livelihoods of honest ranchers. O'Brien's face drained of color. His lawyer whispered urgent suggestions, but the damage was already spreading beyond containment. The charges against Miss Mayfield are dismissed, Judge Harrison declared. Furthermore, this court orders an immediate investigation into the property transfers and document alterations she has exposed. The gavel's bang released a flood of voices throughout the courtroom. Ranchers who had lost their properties pushed forward, demanding answers. Territorial officials huddled in concerned discussions about the legal ramifications. Within hours, Sheriff Bradley had warrants for O'Brien's arrest on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The big rancher's empire began crumbling as quickly as it had been built on stolen foundations. Etta walked free from the courthouse to find half the town waiting to apologize. Mrs. Patterson approached first, her face flushed with embarrassment. Miss Mayfield, I owe you an apology for my behavior when you arrived. You've done this community a great service. Similar acknowledgments came from shopkeepers, farmers, and even some of the women who had pulled their children away from her that first day. Shame had a way of clarifying perspective for decent people who had temporarily lost their way. But the most meaningful vindication came from Jake Morrison, an elderly rancher who had lost his property to O'Brien 6 months earlier. My family worked that land for 20 years, he said, tears streaming down his leathery cheeks. Thought we were just unlucky when the water dried up. Now I know better. Etta clasped his weathered hands in hers. The court will restore what was stolen from you. The investigation moved swiftly once territorial authorities understood the scope of O'Brien's conspiracy. His associates began confessing to save themselves, revealing bribes to local officials and systematic intimidation of vulnerable ranchers. Within a week, property deeds were being corrected throughout the territory. Families returned to ranches they thought they had lost forever. Water rights flowed back to their rightful owners, along with hope for rebuilt futures. Ruthie Fletcher, the innkeeper who had become Etta's first friend in Dusty Creek, stopped by the ranch with news from town. The territorial governor himself is coming next month to thank you personally, she announced. Says your work exposed corruption that went clear up to Phoenix. Etta received the news with characteristic calm. Recognition felt good, but the real satisfaction came from seeing families reunited with their land and livelihoods. The transformation in town attitudes amazed even her. Shopkeepers competed to serve her promptly and courteously. Children waved from doorways instead of hiding behind their mother's skirts. The same streets that had felt hostile now welcomed her with genuine warmth. But the most profound changes occurred at the ranch itself. Success bred success as word of their honest business practices spread throughout the territory. Cattle buyers sought them out specifically, knowing they could trust both the quality of the livestock and the accuracy of the paperwork. Etta's consulting business flourished as other ranchers sought her expertise in contract negotiation and financial management. She handled legal documents for families who had never been able to afford proper representation. Her evenings were spent in the most rewarding work of all. The kitchen table that had once held Jed's chaotic bills now served as a classroom where she taught reading to ranch hands, farmers' children, and anyone else hungry for education. Young Maria Santos rode 5 miles each evening to learn arithmetic for her family's store. Old Pete Williams finally mastered enough reading to understand his own property deed. Sarah Mitchell's twin boys discovered they had natural talent for mathematics under Etta's patient instruction. The informal school grew until Dusty Creek's town council approached her with an official proposition. "We'd like to build a proper schoolhouse," Councilman Edwards explained during his visit to the ranch. "With you as the teacher, if you're willing." The irony was not lost on her. The same type of officials who had dismissed her from teaching in Philadelphia now begged for her services in Arizona. "I have some conditions," Etta replied. "The school welcomes all children regardless of background or family circumstances. No exceptions." The council agreed without hesitation. They had learned the value of her judgment. Jed watched these developments with pride and growing love. The woman who had arrived as a desperate mail-order bride had become the most respected citizen in their community. Her strength and intelligence had saved not just his ranch, but the livelihoods of dozens of families. Their partnership had deepened into something far more precious than mere business arrangement. Evening conversations over coffee had become the highlight of his days. Her laughter at his clumsy jokes felt like music in the desert silence. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, Jed realized he never wanted this partnership to end. Etta had become essential not just to his ranch's success, but to his heart's contentment. The woman who had confessed to aching in her heart had healed his own wounded spirit through her courage and compassion. Now he faced the most important question of his life. 2 years after Etta Mayfield stepped off that dusty stagecoach, Dusty Creek bore little resemblance to the hostile town that had greeted her with suspicious stares. The new schoolhouse stood proudly on Main Street, its fresh white paint gleaming in the desert sun. Children of every background gathered in its welcoming halls, their voices mixing in the universal music of learning. Etta stood at the schoolhouse window, watching her students practice arithmetic on their slate boards. Maria Santos, now fluent in English and mathematics, helped younger children with their lessons. The Mitchell twins had progressed to advanced reading that would have impressed Philadelphia educators. Even old Pete Williams occasionally stopped by to share stories of territorial history with fascinated young listeners. Her consulting business had expanded beyond simple bookkeeping to include legal document preparation for the entire county. Ranchers traveled from 3 territories seeking her expertise in contract negotiation and fraud prevention. The territorial governor had appointed her as an official advisor on land rights disputes, but her greatest satisfaction came from the transformation in people's hearts. The same families who had once whispered cruel gossip now invited her to Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Children who had hidden behind their mothers' skirts now ran to greet her with eager hugs and excited stories about their schoolwork. The Barnes Ranch had become a model of sustainable prosperity. Cattle grazed contentedly in well-managed pastures. The repaired well provided abundant water for irrigation and livestock. Jed's correspondence with buyers throughout the Southwest reflected the literacy skills Etta had patiently taught him during countless evening lessons. Their partnership had evolved into something neither had dared hope for during those first uncertain days. Mutual respect had deepened into genuine love built on shared values and complementary strengths. Jed's steady reliability balanced Etta's innovative thinking. Her educational background enhanced his practical ranching knowledge. On a crisp October morning, Jed found Etta in the kitchen, preparing lesson plans for her advanced students. Autumn sunlight streamed through clean windows onto papers covered with her precise handwriting. The same kitchen table where they had first organized his chaotic bills now served as headquarters for her expanding educational mission. "Etta," he said, his voice carrying unusual nervousness, "I have something important to ask you." She looked up from her work with the patient attention that had first drawn him to her. In the golden light, her face showed the confidence and contentment that had replaced the desperate hope of their early acquaintance. "These past 2 years have been the best of my life," Jed continued, his calloused hands turning his hat brim. "You saved my ranch, but more than that, you saved me from becoming a bitter, defeated man." Etta set down her pen and gave him her complete attention. She had learned to read the subtle signs of his emotional state, and something significant was clearly weighing on his mind. "I know we started as business partners out of necessity," he said, "but somewhere along the way, necessity became choice. At least for me." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. The ring caught the morning light with understated elegance. "Would you marry me, Etta? Not because either of us is desperate or has nowhere else to go, but because we choose to build a life together?" Tears gathered in her eyes as she stood and moved closer to him. The man who had offered her shelter when the world turned cold was now offering his heart with the same quiet generosity. "Yes," she said simply, her voice filled with certainty. "I choose you too." The wedding took place the following spring in the new schoolhouse, with most of Dusty Creek in attendance. Sheriff Bradley, who had arrested her 2 years earlier, now proudly walked her down the aisle in the absence of family. Judge Harrison performed the ceremony with obvious pleasure, having watched their love story unfold from the witness stand to this moment of celebration. Mrs. Patterson provided the wedding cake. Ruthie Fletcher decorated the schoolhouse with wildflowers from the desert hills. Even the territorial governor sent congratulations and a generous gift for the newlyweds. But the most meaningful moment came when Jake Morrison stood to offer a toast during the reception. "Most folks here remember when Etta arrived with nothing but a satchel and a broken heart," he said, raising his glass. "Some of us weren't as welcoming as we should have been, but she never let our ignorance diminish her dignity or her determination to do right by everyone." His voice broke slightly as he continued. "She gave me back my family's ranch and my faith in justice. But more than that, she taught this whole community what it means to judge people by their character instead of their circumstances." The applause was thunderous and heartfelt. As evening settled over their celebration, Jed and Etta stood together on the schoolhouse steps, watching their friends and neighbors head home under a canopy of brilliant stars. The same desert that had once seemed harsh and unwelcoming now felt like the foundation of everything they had built together. A young reporter from the Phoenix newspaper approached them for an interview about their remarkable story. "How did you find happiness in such an unlikely situation?" he asked. Jed looked at his new wife with the wonder that still filled him after all this time. "I learned to listen." Etta smiled and took his hand. "And I learned I was worth hearing." The reporter scribbled notes about their response, but the deeper truth was written in their intertwined fingers and shared glances. Two broken people had found healing in partnership, dignity in mutual respect, and love in the choice to see each other's true worth. Their story would be retold for generations in Dusty Creek, a testament to the transformative power of courage, compassion, and the simple act of truly listening to another human being.